National emergency alert. This is not a test. Seek any of the following items and follow directions as given. A loaded firearm, a sturdy length of rope, knives or other sharpened household objects, a running motor vehicle, large doses of prescription drugs, explosive devices. If you have any of the listed above items, utilize them immediately in order to take your own life. If elders or children are present within your home, attempt to take theirs first. Do not hesitate. This is the only way. This is the only mercy. This message will repeat until none remain to read it. National Emergency Alert. United States Emergency Alert System. The EAS tone blared out once again. I sat dumbfounded as the uncanny voice repeated the message yet again. My first response was to chuckle. Some group of low-life hackers probably got bored and decided to prank the city with a fake EAS warning. I grabbed my phone and loaded up to Discord's server. I knew a few people who lived all around the U.S. I was curious if they too saw it. To my surprise, many had already asked the question for me. It seemed that Minnesota, Washington, and all the way down to Florida had all received the message. This revelation slowly began to unnerve me. Whoever was doing this, it wasn't a localized prank. After a few minutes of seeking answers on other websites, I stumbled upon a freshly made video. A man whose age I was unable to discern stood back from the camera and stood straight. He spoke for a moment, but I could hardly hear the words. Suddenly, he raised his hand to his head, revealing a small firearm, and pulled the trigger. I shouted in shock and immediately clicked my phone off. In a panic, I texted my mother, father, friends, and checked the internet for news. I typed in EAS broadcast 3/24/23, 9:45 p.m. and watched as my search loaded. My stomach dropped. Dozens of articles written mere minutes ago suggesting that the alert was not only nationwide, but verifiably government-issued. CNN, Fox, ABC, they all said the same thing. The U.S. government has issued this warning and informed all major news outlets of its authenticity. The fuck was this? I stared at my phone, silently begging for my family to respond. I was startled by the sudden flicker of the screen. As the EAS system abruptly paused, a video broadcast appeared on screen. The President of the United States stood at a podium, surrounded by others, some of which I recognized as other world leaders, and began to speak. He spoke softly, reassuringly, yet sadly, into his microphone. My fellow Americans, now is not the time for fear. Now is the time for action. There can be no greater mercy than death. There is no other choice. This is our only hope. I ask that each and every American trust in their government, trust in each other, and do what must be done to secure our only remaining opportunity for safety. I watched as he then raised a firearm to his head and pulled the trigger. The camera panned out, and I stared in utter disbelief as the leaders of countries around the world, even those seen as unarguable or cruel, finished their own speeches and took their own lives. After only a few minutes, the room was silent. The EAS system flicked back on. The message repeated again. I stared. For a few minutes, I just sat and stared. What the hell was that? The president was dead? I didn't know what to do. Everything I researched, everything I found, all led to one single conclusion. This was real. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my daze, and I fumbled to grab it. It was my mother. Mom? Mom, what's happening? Are you all right? Where's Dad? I'm okay. We got the broadcast too. Your father is fine. We won't do anything, I promise. I'm freaking out. What's going on? Everything I look up is telling me this is real, but I feel like it's not. It can't be. I'm scared. The president's dead. Why? You'll be fine. I wish we could go to you, but driving from Cali to New York, it's just not possible right now. We'll keep in touch. Me and your father are going to pack the basement just in case this is something big. We don't know what's going on either. It's gonna be fine. Okay. I love you, Mom. Love you too. Stay safe. Be smart. The phone clicked. I felt a wave of relief overwhelm me. Knowing my parents were safe put me at ease. Despite this, the anxiety crept back into my bones after just a few moments. I decided that sitting alone during an emergency would do me no good. I couldn't stay in my apartment. The anxiety would drive me crazy. I decided to take a quick shower, hoping to relax myself, and then get myself ready to leave. I threw a few granola bars in a bag, some water bottles, and other little things just in case I was gone for a while. I'd settled on heading up a few floors where my father's close friend Alexei and his family lived. I didn't know them well, but I'd met them a few times, and we got along, and he was good people. I made my way out of the apartment and towards the stairwell. My shoes echoed slightly off the walls, and a few hurried people rushed past me. At the top of the stairwell, I pushed open the door and headed to Alexei's suite. He wasn't too far down the hall, and within seconds I arrived at his door. I stepped up to the door and placed my hand out to knock, only to be cut off by a violent noise from within. Bang. Bang. 2 ear-piercing shots rang out behind the door. I heard an agonized moan mixed with pain and sorrow. Then, another shot. Bang. My hands began to tremble slightly. I knocked on the door, begging for them to answer. I tried the handle, but it was locked. I knew what I heard, but I couldn't accept it. He had a fucking kid. This wasn't real. How could they trust the message? What did they know? Had they seen something? Heard something? Or was it blind, faithful trust in the broadcast? My phone buzzed. I slumped down against the wall, shaking, and fished it from my pocket. It was from my father. I unlocked the screen and read the text. I read the message over and over. I stared down at the screen and a tear began to form. She's dead. I'm next. California is fucked. It was the only way. I love you. I threw up. Maybe it was a volatile, violent reaction to what I had just read or a panic-induced reflex. Either way, I sat, hunched over a pile of vomit in the middle of the hallway. More gunshots began to ring out, not just inside the building, but muffled ones that I could tell came from outside the building. The lights began to flicker. I sat in a state of shock, feeling desperate to get out of our hallway. I decided I'd forced my way into Alexei's apartment. I rammed my body into the door. Maybe a part of me hoped they were okay. I stepped back and hit the door again, but I think that deep down, it was truly just morbid curiosity. I slammed into it again and again, and with a final effort, I crashed through the door as the lock gave way. I stumbled inside and took in my surroundings. The apartment was dark. The living room lay in front of me, a couch in the center, with a television in front, and a calming tie-dye rug between the two. The TV still buzzed with the EAS alert, begging us to take our own lives. It was now discussing the proper way to utilize a knife to take one's own life. To the right, windows stood tall, peering into the city. I noted that it was strangely bright for 11 p.m. I attempted to slow my breath and speak in a calm tone as I made my way further inside.
Alexei!
I called out, hoping my father's friend would respond. I waited for a moment and then called for his wife.
Maddie, you there?
No response. With a pause and feeling of dread, I called out their young daughter's name.
Emily?
Silence. I began to move through the apartment, guided only by the dim, flickering lights. I remembered I had packed a small, battery-operated flashlight and retrieved it from my bag. I aimed it around the living room and found a door standing to the left side. I cautiously made my way towards it and creaked it open. Upon the bed, I saw, for the second time that day, I threw up, the bloodied body of a woman and, oh God, the body of a small child lay upon the bed. They had been sleeping, a gunshot wound in both their heads. In a chair in a dark corner, I shined my flashlight. Alexei sat, gun dropped to his side, and a bullet wound in the side of his skull. I backed out of the room, ran to the bathroom, and vomited, yet again. I stood to my feet and walked to the living room. I stared at the TV. This was real. Something was out there. Something so fucked, so terrible, that the government, every government, was begging us to end our own lives, and people were listening. The gunshots around the city began to lessen. I thought to myself how chilling it was that each one was a single shot, or short groups of single shots.
If you listened close, the last one always took the longest. I looked back out the window. The world was strangely bright. It should be completely dark by now, and as I focused on the sky, I noted a strange coloration, a kaleidoscope of slight red, orange, and purple tints, difficult to notice without focusing. The stars, too, appeared dimmer. I jumped backwards as something flew downstairs past me, and then another. I looked to other buildings, and with a terrible realization, I saw that they were people, jumping to their deaths. I let out a shout. Tears began to form in my eyes as I shut the blinds and turned the TV up to drown the noise out. The EAS made the high-pitched sound, and a new alert appeared on the screen. National Emergency Alert. This is not a test. Police and military units have been deployed door to door to ensure compliance with government orders. This is the only mercy. God save us all. God bless America. The EAS shifted back to its usual message, the screen flickering. I knew that was bad, but in the moment, I didn't give a shit. I reopened my phone, stared back at the last message my father had sent as the adrenaline faded alongside the gunshots. The message truly began to sink in. Now, sheltered again safely within an apartment, panic settled. I called my mother. No response. My father didn't answer either. A dozen messages sent in half a minute. Not a single response. For a long while, I laid on the couch, ignoring the fact that 3 bodies were lying just a room away, and cried. At some point, I fell asleep. I woke up to the sound of wind and sirens in the distance. I peered down at my wrist. Though my watch read 4:33 a.m., the same strange coloration still filled the sky outside. It had gotten no darker and no brighter. I stood and made my way to the windows. A thick mist was beginning to form in the streets below. I checked my phone and looked to social media to seek further answers. For now, it seemed, my mind had blocked the pain of the loss of my family. I saw a few dozen videos, blurred and tagged NSFW. I was pretty sure I knew what they were, and I refused to open them. I saw countless videos from across the world showing the same strange colored sky and the same thick fog rolling in at street level. One post from Australia, made just minutes ago, depicted the same exact light levels as I was witnessing in New York, despite being on the other side of the world. When I looked for posts from California, where my parents were, I simply saw nothing. Not a single report, not a single post. In fact, I couldn't find anything coming from the West Coast, not even a news broadcast. I determined that whatever it was we had to fear, it was moving west to east. And then I saw one post. It was a live stream from Utah. The woman behind the camera was muttering through sobs and deep breaths. She suddenly went silent, and her crying stopped. I listened closely to her gentle, shaky breaths as she aimed the camera to her window. The camera moved, and I watched as she walked to her door and opened it, stepping onto her porch. I'm going to face west now. The camera panned left, and what I saw made my limbs go numb. I saw nothing, as if whatever was there could not be comprehended by a simple camera. I don't mean that I just saw a normal plain landscape and nothing was wrong, no. It was as if I had seen the manifestation of nothingness, as if the universe had ceased to exist in that area, not dark nor bright. It was just nothing. Looking at it for longer than a few seconds made me nauseous and dizzy. Whatever it was, somehow I knew that only my eyes could even begin to comprehend its terrible majesty. Whatever this woman was seeing, it destroyed her mind. The voice behind the camera then spoke up in a soft, calm, almost too sane tone of voice. I understand. I'm going to go now. A simple gunshot behind the camera, and the feed suddenly cut. I was disturbed, deeply, dizzy, nauseous, but most of all, I felt frightened, not only because of what I saw, or rather, didn't see, but because of what I heard, just as the video cut out. A sound, like that of 1,000 foghorns and 1,000,000 screams, mixed into one horrific noise, filled the air before the feed cut. Knock, knock, knock. I stared at the screen. The knocking turned into pounding, then a shout. "NYPD, come to the door." "Fuck," I muttered. I knew something terrible was out there, inching closer and closer. I knew people were killing themselves, en masse. And I knew the government wasn't lying. I'd seen the evidence, but I couldn't convince myself to take my own life. The police pounded on the door yet again. "We're coming in." I had already broken the lock when I entered, so I had little time to act. I slid out the window onto the fire escape and gently slid the window shut. I heard the door break open, and the officer stepped inside. I listened to him search the apartment, then click on his radio. Though muffled, I could hear him speaking. "Dispatch, this is Sergeant Lake. Riverside apartment complex is clear. Last room confirmed. 3 dead, 2 adult, 1 child." There was a period of silence, followed by his final words. "I understand. 10:42. There was another brief silence, and then a gunshot. I didn't bother to look inside. I made my way down the fire escape. As I descended toward the street, the mist I saw earlier began to obstruct my view. The mist reeked of sulfur, and I couldn't help but gag as I reached the pavement. I placed my shirt over my nose. The city was uncomfortably quiet. Cars sat empty. I assumed everyone had either taken their own lives or been put down by the cops and the military during the hours when I slept. Perhaps a few others survived and hid like me. I couldn't count the amount of bodies laying on the street. Some, I could tell, had jumped. Others lined up and shot next to their bodies. Soldiers who shot themselves afterwards. I saw cars that had crashed themselves into buildings. Fires and car alarms went unchecked. I figured I'd head for the subway tunnels. First, however, I slipped into a storefront. Food littered the floor, and I ducked between 2 shelves. I opened my phone and checked Twitter. I needed to know how close that thing was. Since no contact was coming from anywhere that had been consumed, I figured the last location to cease contact would determine where it was. I didn't like what I found. Any post from Wisconsin to Mississippi had stopped at least 30 minutes ago. That meant that whatever it was had moved through the entire central U.S. and was nearing the East Coast. I clicked on a video posted by someone in Pittsburgh. There was no speaking. It was a 15-minute-long video. At first, I thought it was just a recording of the same mist I saw outside. I was about to click off the video when a long, spindly appendage rose above the mist. It was gray, like an elephant's leg, and looked to be of similar texture, but it was thin and not of this world. The end of it split into 4 other finger-like extensions. It shot towards whoever was holding the camera and pulled them through their window onto the street. They still held their phone, but the rest of the creature was now obscured by the mist. They began to scream, but the creature moved suddenly and with unimaginable speed, dragging its victim behind. For 13 minutes, the phone recorded their screams as they were rushed towards wherever the creature was bringing them. I skipped ahead minutes at a time. I resumed again when the mist began to clear, slowly revealing that same incomprehensible thing from the first video. The person being dragged began to beg, plead with whatever was dragging them. Their petrified hands still clung to the phone, terror locking them shut. I watched as the camera grew closer and closer to the nauseating form on the screen. Suddenly, the screams were drowned out again by that wretched foghorn-like noise, and then the video cut out. I expected myself to scream, break down, or cry, to begin shaking, but I didn't. My fear response had begun to shut down. In its place, a sense of desperation arose. I rummaged through the store, grabbed a few masks from a shelf. I figured it'd help with the sulfur stench that continued to nauseate me. I chugged a water, decided to stay off the main streets. I headed to the back of the store and froze. In a chair next to a table lay another corpse. I assumed it to be the store owner. In his hands he held a revolver, and on the table, 5 bullets. He'd decided to off himself with Russian roulette. I guess he got lucky. I pulled the gun from his hand and loaded the 5 remaining bullets into the weapon. I pulled the mask over my face and opened the rear door into the alleyway. A desperate scream echoed in the distance. The rock in my stomach returned as the gravity of my situation once again hit me. I was alone in a city of the dead. I held back tears and forced myself to continue out the door. At the end of the alleyway, I saw a fast-moving shadow, obscured by the mist, flash by. I raised the revolver and slowly made my way to the opposite end of the alley. I turned to the corner, only to find a short corridor blocked off by a brick wall. Behind me, I heard a scraping sound. A thin, spindly gray arm with 4 finger-like appendages slowly inched its way around the corner. In a panic, I raised the gun and shot. The force of the shot kicked against my outstretched arms, and I saw the impact of the bullet against the creature's arm. It tore through, spraying the wall behind with nothing. There was no blood. A second arm smacked into the adjacent wall, and the creature presented its whole body to me. Its pale gray skin was slick and leathery, the body shaped like that of an oversized dog with no head. Across its torso, a line of jagged spikes, at 4 points protruding from the top of the creature's body, were 4 of the limbs I had first seen. They shot up into the air for a meter, then bent back down, leaving the torso suspended a few feet above the ground it stood upon. The legs were thick where they protruded, and thinned out as they went on, until bending at the joint, where it stayed the same thickness all the way back down. It had no discernible eyes, only a thin vertical mouth that ran from the front of its body all the way across the length of the bottom. Somehow, I knew it was looking at me. The thin, snake-like mouth opened and let out a screech, similar to the one I'd heard when I left the store. I fired off 2 more rounds into the body of the creature, and it fell back. I fired another into the thin portion of one of its legs, and it split off from the rest of the body. The creature let go another howl and charged towards me, now limping. In those old scary movies, the monster runs at the person and they scream bloody murder. That's bullshit. As the horror barreled towards me, I let out just a slight grunt as I prepared to act. I ducked under its elevated torso, scraping the length of my left arm on one of its jagged teeth and smacking my head. Its skin was like brittle rock. My arm burned with pain, but I continued to run. All that I could think of was the person in that video, their screams, their begging. I couldn't let that be me. The creature rammed into the wall with all its might, missing me and crashing through the sturdy red brick. I stumbled to my feet as it turned itself around, and I sprinted back down the alley. I made it to the main street, just as screeches of pain and what I could only imagine to be rage echoed behind me. By luck alone, running through the mist, I ran into an SUV with its driver's side door open wide and threw myself inside, slamming the door shut and jamming my ribs into the emergency brake. Gasping for air, I pressed lock on the door and slid into the back seat. I heard the creature burst into the open and let out another angry bellow. I was too frightened to peek out, and I doubt I'd see anything through the thick fog anyways. I heard its unfittingly heavy footsteps grow closer. I painfully held my breath. Slowly the roof of the car pressed inwards, and I could see the indent of 4 long tendril-like fingers pressing downwards. I gently placed the muzzle of the gun to my skull. I began to count in my head, a nervous tick. 1, 2, 3, 4. The indent pressed deeper. Another screech left the creature's mouth. My finger tightened on the trigger. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The indent began to give way, as if pressure had been eased. 10, 11, 12. The creature let out a sudden scream, as if reinvigorated, and I heard it begin to run. Seconds later in the distance, I heard a distinctly human scream. I finally took another breath and placed the gun back into my waistband. I then took it back out and opened the rotating cylinder. 1 bullet left. Seeing the last resort filled me with a sense of peace. I checked my watch again. I had maybe an hour and a half at best, until the real threat arrived. I cautiously opened the door of the SUV. The mist, thick as ever, clogged my vision, and the scent of sulfur violated my nose yet again. I no longer had the handgun drawn, despite the sense of safety it provided. I needed that last bullet. I softened my footsteps and made my way to the nearest sidewalk. Bodies littered the floor. I decided it would be best to re-equip myself. Quietly, I walked along for about 2 blocks, every so often pausing and ducking into cover when I heard one of the creatures scream. More than once I saw them trundle past, terrifyingly quick. Finally, I arrived at my destination, a small corner storefront. I opened the door and let out a relaxed breath. I often came here to restock on cheap snacks and to order a sub. The familiar arrangement of shelves provided a short sense of normalcy. And then I heard shuffling coming from the back of the store. My heart began to beat faster and my throat seemed to tighten. I snuck behind the counter, and as I had hoped, I found a bat. The store clerk once threatened me with it when he wrongly accused me of stealing beef jerky. Now, ironically, it might just save me. Against all instinct, I moved towards where I had heard the sound. I felt scared, but something in me had to know. Besides, something in the back may be useful to me. Then I heard a grunt, followed by a short sob. It was coming from a large freezer. The door was locked shut from the inside. I tapped the door with the edge of the bat, and the noise immediately stopped. Maybe I was feeling desperate for human contact. I don't know. But despite my instincts, I spoke into the door. Is someone in there? Anyone? I heard a sudden scuffle, then rapid footsteps. I stood back. The door swung open, and a woman stared back at me, tears in her eyes, alongside what I could only read as relief, which I assumed was at the sight of me. "Oh, thank God. Thank God, please help me." "Hey, it's okay. What's wrong?" She reached into her pocket and revealed a handgun. I stepped back. "Please. I can't do it myself." What? I said. "I need you to kill me, please." She forced the gun into my hand as tears welled up within her eyes. "Please," she shouted. I immediately jumped back, startled. "Shut the fuck up. You'll attract those things," I whispered harshly. The tears began to fall from her eyes. In a rush, words began to drain from her mouth. I had to kill them. I had to. The warnings, then the president, the cops, the army, then those awful creatures, oh God. She paused to let out a sob, then continued. And then I knew it was all I could do. I brought them to the car, and with this gun I just, when they sat down, but I couldn't do it, not to myself. No. I ran, and I ended up here, and I tried, but I just can't. Please, I should be with them. I stared at her. What she was asking me was horrible. To kill another human, even if they wanted it? Could I justify that? I thought of Mother, my father. The pain he must have felt after killing her, it would have been unrelenting. His suffering only ended when he had pulled the trigger on himself. But this woman, she couldn't do it. The pain, the horror. She'd lost her mind. Was it a mercy? She stood there, silently sobbing. I spoke up. "It's going to be okay. You did the right thing." With that, she stumbles forward and grabbed onto me. She let loose another set of sobs. "Please," she said simply. A million thoughts ran through my head. I imagined myself killing my own parents, the pain I'd feel, the regret, the desperation to have peace. Okay, I responded. I wrapped an arm around her, hoping to provide some comfort. It's okay. It's all okay. I raised my hand, now holding the gun she had given to me. She looked up and stared me in the eyes. I placed the gun to her head and gave her a final strong hug, as if to comfortingly say, "You aren't alone." She looked up. "Thank you." I pulled the trigger. Immediately I regretted my decision. Not because I had killed the woman. She was begging me, and for that I felt only that I had done the right thing. No. What filled me with regret was the piercingly loud gunshot that erupted in the air when I pulled the trigger. Within seconds, I heard multiple violent screeches. The creatures were coming towards me. I laid the woman's body gently upon the ground and slid her eyes shut. I grabbed the bat and slid it onto my back, fitting it snug between my bag and my shoulder blades. I checked the gun the woman had given me, and through a slit in the magazine I counted 9 rounds remaining. I stood up and bolted for the front door. One of the creatures ran past, stumbled, and crashed through the window, sending it tumbling into the shelves as it caught sight of me. I spun back around, my adrenaline now pumping, and prepared to run. It let out a screech and swung its forearms wildly as it regained its footing. I dashed toward the rear exit and found myself in yet another alleyway. I ran toward the closest opening and ran into the open street. I could hear the creature snarling not far behind as it plowed into a car and continued to chase me. I turned back and fired 2 shots. The creature let out an ear-splitting scream and continued to pursue me. To my left, I saw a revolving door in the entrance to a large hotel. I ran towards it as I heard the beast gain more and more ground upon me. I ran full force into the door, slamming my hands into a bar and beginning to push. The rotating door began to move, but stopped suddenly. The end of the creature's grotesque arm had pinned itself between the wall and the section of the door behind me. The 4 squid-like appendages at the end of its arm thrashed violently around. I aimed the handgun and let loose another flurry of rounds. 5 shots total impacted the thin arm of the creature, tearing chunks of flesh from its arm. As it roared in rage at my defiance, I fired again, another 2 rounds, and the gun clicked empty. The edge of its arm hung by a thread, hardly moving. I gave the door another mighty shove, and looked back as the arm was finally cleaved off by the rotating door. Wasting no time, I made my way into the lobby, where I found an elevator sitting open. I began to frantically press on the button that would take me to the highest floor, and the entire time keeping my eyes on the rotating door as the monster tried to force itself in. The button lit up, just as the volatile creature pushed its way through the door and into the lobby. The elevator door slid shut. I felt a lurch as the machine kicked to life, lifting me all the way to the top floor. Ding. 13th floor, chimed the robotic voice. The doors opened, and I stepped into the hallway. Many of the doors appeared to have been forcibly opened, and peering inside I saw the bodies of families who had been executed by the military and police forces. In others, I saw windows smashed open, and no signs of bodies. I made my way to a closed door, and to my surprise, when I tried the handle, it opened. The room was empty, other than your typical hotel furniture. A cheap flat-screen TV to the left, a bathroom on the right, and a single, clean bed with 2 nightstands on each side. 2 poorly made paintings of random vases hung from the wall. The lack of damage led me to believe the room had been unoccupied when the broadcast aired. I flicked the TV on and the broadcast flickered to life. Now it showed only a map of the U.S. Just about the entirety of the United States had been blacked out. Only a few of the most northeastern states remained untouched. New York had been half consumed. I figured I had about 20 minutes until I reached the city outskirts. Hope drained from my body. I wouldn't make it to the subway in 20 minutes. Not with those things outside. Who's to say I'd be spared if I was to get there? I sat in silence. I had known for a while that my struggle was likely fruitless. A million others, like me, probably fought till the last moment to stay alive. But what could we do? Some freakish cosmic horror was consuming our world. Something so strange that videos of it could not be comprehended. Something I didn't even understand. Something that the entire government, hell, every government, determined was so terrible that death was our only mercy. Why did I try? I figured maybe it was a deep down instinct, a refusal to die, a refusal to give up when everything is against you. I grabbed the revolver from my pocket. I opened the cylinder and stared at it for a moment. One bullet. I heard a sniffle coming from the bathroom. I clicked the cylinder shut, repocketed the revolver, and grabbed the bat. I cursed myself for not checking the bathroom upon entry. I silently walked up to the door and raised my foot. With a grunt of effort, I kicked the door open and was immediately greeted with a high-pitched scream. I stared in front of me. My heart dropped. It was a young kid, no older than 5. He stared at me with wide eyes. He was sitting tucked away in the bathtub, mostly hidden from sight. There was a short period of silence as I stood, unsure what to do or what to say. "Have you seen my dad? He told me to stay here till he got back," he asked. I paused. Yeah, he's fine. I saw him earlier." I glanced at my watch. I had about 15 minutes. Is he with you?" the kid asked. No, he's... I cursed the boy's father in my head for leaving his son behind. The coward probably offed himself and left the kid to whatever was coming. He's outside, fighting monsters. He asked me to come protect you till he gets back." The boy smiled slightly, probably excited by the thought of his father, his hero, beating up the scary creatures outside. "Here, get out of the tub. I have some snacks," I offered. I dug into my bag and pulled out the granola bars and water I'd packed from my apartment. I also pulled out a thin chocolate bar, something I had grabbed in the store, so I could spend my last moments, if need be, with something sweet. I opened the granola bar and handed it to the kid alongside some water. He thanked me. I stood up and told him to stay put. I walked over to the window in the main room and opened the curtains. I stared outside. He wasn't my kid. I didn't even know him. But for every part of me that wanted to leave him, I just knew I couldn't. He didn't deserve to be alone. He didn't deserve to be scared. I looked down into the streets. The mist was beginning to dissipate. It was close. The video I had seen earlier, where that person was dragged away. When they got close to whatever it was, the mist began to fade. Again, I felt for the revolver in my pocket. A feeling of terror began to overwhelm me, but I did my best and pushed it back. Just then, I heard a noise so loud the building shook. So chilling that my blood ran cold. It was a sound like 1,000 foghorns and 1,000,000 screams mixed into one. This time, it didn't come from a phone speaker. The kid ran out of the bathroom towards me and asked me what it was. I was silent. "What's the noise? I'm scared," he asked again. It was the army," I lied. "The soldiers are going to be here soon. They use that sound to scare away the bad guys." "Cool. Does that mean I get to go home soon?" "Of course," I responded. I turned and looked at the kid. He was now holding a small, plush husky. I kneeled down. "What's his name?" "I named him Husky," he said. I chuckled at that. Of course he did. "Well, Tell Husky I'm honored to meet him. I stood up. I stared at the kid and felt sick. Let's go on a walk. I want to show you something cool. All right, when we open that door, just keep your head down and only look at the ground, kid, okay? Don't ruin the surprise. He nodded silently. I aimed my eyes at the ground as well, opened the door, stepped up onto the rooftop. I stared down at my phone's compass, pointed myself directly east. I told the kid to do the same, and then raise his head. He did as instructed, and so did I. The city skyline was still intact. With the kaleidoscope sky behind it, it was gorgeous. I took a few steps backwards. "Whoa," said the kid, even from behind him. I could tell he was grinning. I raised the revolver and shot. His body slumped forwards. Tears formed in my eyes, alongside an overwhelming sense of disgust. I walked forwards to the ledge of the roof. I began to cry silently, out of fear, out of rage, sadness, and disgust. I shuddered and took in a deep breath. I braced myself mentally, shut my eyes, and spun around. I was now facing west. I slipped a piece of chocolate in my mouth and tasted its sweetness. I heard that sound again. It was closer, so loud that it now hurt to hear. I felt a warm liquid begin to drip out of my ears. Against every instinct, out of desperation for answers, I opened my eyes, and the sight in front of me filled me with every single terrible emotion I could imagine, even ones I'd never felt before, emotions which did not exist, and those that did. The chocolate's taste turned putrid within my mouth. Before me was a monumental being. It was pure darkness, and it expanded from horizon to horizon, its height indiscernible as it mixed with the strangely colored sky. Within, I could see the darkness itself move, as if it was made up of trillions of vile tentacles. The second I looked upon it, I could hear countless screams, countless beings begging for mercy in every known language, and countless more in incomprehensible tongues, languages of alien races, old as time itself. Waves of darkness emanated from it, pushing out and then pulling, expanding itself to consume more and more. I could not explain what I was seeing, and yet somehow I understood it to be an incomprehensible being, an ancient evil which subsided upon suffering. I could feel my mind crumbling as I attempted to view even a portion of its terrible majesty. I dropped down to my knees, my mind filling with knowledge, understanding of what had happened, of why things happened. The longer I stared, the closer I came to passing out. I let out a scream, a desperate, pained scream as I felt my mind collapse, and with every ounce of willpower, of strength, I pushed backwards with my legs and dropped from the building. I shut my eyes and waited for the impact. It never came. I felt 4 long, thin tendrils wrapped around my torso. My shattered mind understood that it was one of the creatures from before, lurking on the side of the building. In fact, judging by the missing limb, it was the one I had shot. The last thimble of my sanity began to panic. I let out a scream. I began to beg, to bargain, as it began to run towards the ancient being which engulfed the horizon, holding me in tow. I punched at the creature, doing nothing. I couldn't think. I couldn't remember how to think. The only thing that mattered was the terror and pain I felt in my body. It grew stronger as I grew closer, and I could only mindlessly scream and beg. The ancient cosmic monstrosity filled my vision, and I felt my physical form melt away, and I felt nothing but agony. I tried to scream, but I had no body to scream with.